One of the last things you'd expect to find in a village in South Africa is a tribe of black natives who claim to be Jewish. Tens of thousands of them scattered across South Africa, Zimbabwe, and Mozambique. Can this tribe, called the Lemba, really be who they think they are? The way science has gone about trying to answer that question may be the most fascinating part of this story. But first, meet the Lemba. These are the Lemba of Sintamule, South Africa. The Lemba look African, and they are African. But they say they're also Jewish.
The Lemba community are the descendants of Abraham, Isaac, Jacob. They are the descendants.
He says that because the Lemba believe their ancestors were Jews from ancient Israel who traveled by boat down the eastern coast of Africa. Lemba elder Mashea Mativa passed the story he learned from his father and his grandfather before him on to his daughter, Rudu. Were you actually told as a child that you were Jewish?
Yes. Yes.
When you would tell people, what was the reaction?
Get out of here. And
come on.
You're lying. There are no black Jews. And you just don't look like a Jewish person.
And it wasn't just the Lemba's neighbors who were skeptical. Tudor Parfit, a professor in London, specializes in the history of Jews in Asia and Africa. You're an anthropologist. You've never heard anything about Jews migrating over the centuries anywhere below Ethiopia.
There's absolutely nothing in any record about Jewish penetration of sub-Saharan Africa.
So Parfit didn't know what to make of the men who showed up to hear him speak at a conference in South Africa 10 years ago.
At the back of the hall where I was giving my lecture, there were a group of black men wearing yarmulkes, skull caps, Jewish skull caps. I thought that was a bit odd. So afterwards I kind of wandered across and chatted to them about this and that, and they said that they were black Jews. And I didn't believe it. So you told them flat out you didn't believe it? I said, I'm sure this isn't the case. And they said, well, come back with us to the village for the weekend, and you'll see that what we're saying is true. Parfit accepted the invitation and was astounded to find that many of the Lemba's practices were in fact strikingly similar to those of Jews. He even found the Lemba version of a kosher butcher shop. Samuel Moeti, a Lemba who served in South Africa's parliament, was one of Parfit's guides.
We don't partake of pork.
Are you kosher?
I'm kosher.
Do you eat meat and milk together?
Not together. It's foreign to us to mix milk and meat.
These are all the kosher rules or laws.
Exactly.
Moeti admits that some Jewish traditions have gotten a bit mixed up over time, like circumcision, which most Jews practice when a baby is 8 days old.
Originally it was 8 days old, but now the present time it's 8 years old.
That must be painful at 8 years old.
Well, it is painful. It is part of it because they've got to be taught to endure some pains.
Parfit returned many times to study the Lemba, searching for evidence that might prove they are indeed descended from Jews. He tried to retrace the route they say their ancestors took, but he could never find definitive historical proof of any connection to ancient Israel. And that's where things remained until scientists who had never heard of the Lemba began looking into another story that's been passed down from generation to generation. These men beneath the prayer shawls in Israel are what's called in Hebrew Kohanim, or Jewish priests, not rabbis, but priests. According to the Bible, 3,000 years ago, Moses decreed that all the male descendants of his brother Aaron would be priests with duties to perform during holy ceremonies. The Kohanim say the tradition has passed from father to son ever since, as it has for Dr. Karl Skorecki. He was in synagogue one day when he got an idea.
Another man from a completely different part of the world was called upon to participate as a Kohen or Jewish priest in a blessing, in a priestly blessing. And I looked at him and said, this person's of North African descent. I'm of recent Eastern European descent.
But according to the oral tradition, you and he descended from the same single ancestor.
That's right.
Moses' brother, Aaron.
That's right. And how did I get that tradition? My father told me. And how did he get it? His father told him. So I thought to myself, well, what else travels along the male lineage? And it's the Y chromosome.
The Y chromosome. Enter modern science. It turns out that the answers to all kinds of questions about who our ancestors were, where they lived, and who we're related to exist inside each one of us, encoded in our chromosomes. And scientists are just finding out how to read them. They're honing in on the tiny Y chromosomes that men pass down to their sons. The Y is a goldmine for geneticists because it is the only chromosome that passes from parent to child unchanged. Dr. Skorecki called Michael Hammer a Y chromosome expert at the University of Arizona.
My Y chromosome is identical to my father's Y chromosome, and his is identical to his father, and so on back through the generations. So it traces a paternal lineage.
And so that is why this is so helpful and why you can keep going back and back and back.
Exactly.
Hammer joined forces with a team of geneticists in London to see if all the Jewish priests were in fact related. They collected hundreds of DNA samples from men around the world, gathered by simply swabbing the inner cheek. They tested Jewish priests, Jewish men who are not priests, and men who are not Jewish, then compared them to see if the priests' Y chromosomes were different from the others.
The answer to that question is dramatically yes.
David Goldstein headed up the London team.
The priestly Y chromosomes are pretty similar, and they are very clearly distinguishable statistically from the general Jewish population Y chromosomes. And when I say statistically, it means that it can't be a fluke.
The results proved that Jewish priests from all around the world are in fact descended from one single man, a common paternal ancestor somewhere back in time. But the scientists wanted to know more. How long ago did this common great-great-great-grandfather live? David Goldstein crunched some numbers. And what is your estimate?
And the estimate is 3,000 years before present.
Bingo.
Which is a number that accords very well with oral tradition.
With Moses and his brother Aaron.
With an estimate of when Aaron might have lived. If you were to take a guess, you would guess it's close to that.
The results electrified Tudor Parfit. Finally, there was a way to test the Lemba's claim that they descended from the Jews. With test kits in hand, Parfit returned to South Africa to see if he could find the genetic equivalent of a needle in a haystack, the Jewish priest Y chromosome in the Lemba. There was no concern? What about with you?
No concern.
What if it's not true?
No, that was not an issue because they've never doubted that.
Were you tested?
Yes, I was also tested. I was happy to be tested.
Parfit collected the samples, then shipped them back to London, to the lab where Goldstein's colleague Mark Thomas prepared them for testing. There's actually DNA in here. Where is it?
You can't really see it very much, but they're in the bottom, just here.
This is Lemba? Mm-hmm. So how many people are represented on this?
There are 95 people represented there.
So 95 Lemba. Mm-hmm. Each one of these little tiny test tubes is a different Lemba person. Mm-hmm. I feel like I'm holding 95 men
well,
in my hand.
Well, in a way you are, I guess.
Thomas isolated the Y chromosomes and ran them through a battery of tests. He was the very first to see the match.
I tried to be cool about these things and just treat it just as data, but obviously I felt, well, I've seen this chromosome before.
Did you believe it?
I always believe it. I always believe my own data.
Translated onto the computer screen, with each man's Y chromosome pictured as a horizontal band, it jumps out, even to a non-geneticist.
This panel represents a Lemba, and this panel represents a Jewish priest.
Well, I can see this. It's obvious. Look at this. This is the Lemba, this is the priest, and all these major markers are identical. They just line up perfectly, one right after the next.
That's exactly right, and what you've done is just identified within the Lemba the priestly Y chromosome type.
It's obvious.
And it's a match, that's exactly right.
It turned out that about 10% of Lemba men had the priest Y chromosome, roughly the same percentage found in other Jewish groups.
Explain what it's been like to have the outside world acknowledge what you have believed.
It is wonderful. It is really wonderful.
Now I can proudly tell people without being laughed at and being called a liar or trying to look important.
And it isn't just the Lemba who've been affected by the study. David Goldstein found out he has the priestly Y chromosome too.
Now you have this genetic
And
marker.
I have it as well. Yeah.
So they're your cousins.
Well, with respect to the Y chromosome, it's a very good bet that we're related.
You never know who you're going to be related to when you think of people in this new genetic context. You may be black, you may be white, but you may share genetic lineages. And I think this is a more realistic view of the human species. We've been sharing lineages for thousands and thousands of years, and yet we look different.
The scientists say the Lemba are only the beginning. The refrigerator in geneticist Michael Hammer's laboratory reads like a casting call for a Benetton commercial. He's got Y chromosomes from more ethnic groups than you can imagine. Everyone from the Athabascan Indians in Alaska to the Yaozus and the Yizus who live in China.
So are you saying that at some point we're going to have a family tree of the whole world?
One of the overall goals ultimately is to look at genetic variation in human populations and reconstruct a family tree for where they trace to ultimately.
The whole world?
For the whole world, for all living people today.
Meanwhile, in South Africa, the Lemba are reveling in their new status. There's talk of building a synagogue and trying to find a Hebrew teacher to instruct the children. But there's one little wrinkle.
We've been into the cemetery.
Okay.
And you see some graves where there's both the Star of David and a cross.
Yes.
How is it possible that you can be Christian and Jewish?
We as Lembas don't believe ourselves as a religious group per se. We are a cultural group. I am born Lemba. Jewishness in me is inborn.
Many Lembas became Christian in order to get an education. In South Africa, missionary schools were among the only places willing to teach black children, but only if they were baptized. For many, Christianity stuck.
In your own mind and in your heart, are you Jewish or are you Christian? Which is your religion?
I'm both. I'm both. When I pray to God, and I pray to, I also mention Jesus Christ's name. And I teach my son that Jesus Christ was a good man and that he's one of the Jewish people. So we practice both in my house.
But now, with the scientific proof, there's new interest in the old ways.
You say your cousin is going to build a synagogue.
Yes.
Would you ever consider studying to become a rabbi?
I am considering that.
You haven't made up your mind yet?
I haven't made up my mind yet.
Oh, well, you're going to let us know, okay?
No.
Okay.